Warning. My fanfic contains mentions of blood, abuse, and torture. Viewer discretion is advised.
Sebastian, Anne, and Mika opened their eyes swiftly and pulled their hands away from one another. Grief and disbelief were written on the twins' faces. Anne held herself tightly as tears began to well up in her eyes. Sebastian held his head in his hand as he tried to process the memory they witnessed. Mika stared at the ground solemnly.
I'm sorry. I thought you needed to know the truth.
She gripped her right forearm tightly, feeling the raised scars beneath the fabric of her shirt. Sebastian managed to pull his head away from his hands to look up at Mika, with a widely concerned expression on his face.
We're living with our parents' murderer?
She remained silent with her gaze locked onto the stone floor. After a moment, Mika looked at Sebastian.
I'm so sorry, Sebastian. I couldn't find the words. So, I knew I could show you instead.
Her eyes showing remorse, while her expression remained emotionless. Sebastian stood up abruptly and paced in front of the fireplace with his fists clenched. He gritted his teeth as he stood in place, staring into the dancing flames. He slammed his fist into the mantel.
That hypocrite! He was always blaming me for Anne's curse, blaming me for everything, always calling me my father's son, as if that's an insult.
His eyes burning with frustration, Anne quietly sobbed into her hands as she watched her brother's tantrum. He faintly heard his sister's cries and turned to face her, his expression softening before kneeling beside Anne. He took one of her hands into his.
Oh, Anne, I'm so sorry. I'm letting my emotions get the better of me. Again.
Anne looked at Sebastian with tear-filled eyes.
Sebastian, he lied to us. We have to turn him in.
But Anne, how? It's not like we have evidence of his involvement with our parents' deaths.
The three fell silent for a moment as they pondered what to do about Solomon. Anne broke the silence as she placed a hand on Mika's knee.
Thank you, Mika. You helped us find a bit of closure with our parents. We're all family, and we'll always have each other.
Sebastian stood up and turned towards Mika.
Yes, thank you. But about those other memories.
A small frown stretching across his face as he looked into her eyes. She slowly stood up straight, her body still hovering over the stone floor as she straightened her uniform.
If it's all right with you, I'd rather not speak of it.
Sebastian held his arms out wide while cocking his head to the side with a wide smile on his face. She flinched when Sebastian opened his arms to embrace her. Sorrow glistened in his eyes as he approached her slowly. He pulled her into a tight embrace. Mika's body tensed from fear at first, before slowly relaxing in his arms. She buried her face in his chest, while returning his firm embrace. Mika began to sob quietly into his shirt. Sebastian just held her, placing a hand on her head to hold her tighter.
It's all right. Let it out. We won't let anything happen to you. He'll never take you away again.
Suddenly, Mika pulled away from his embrace abruptly, her eyes scanning the common room as she levitated into a defensive position. The faint sound of footsteps echoed through the empty common room as they slowly grew louder. The twins drew out their wands and braced themselves. The light emanating from the lamps and torches glittered over blonde hair as a familiar figure came down the spiral staircase. Anne, Sebastian, and Mika felt a wave of relief. The figure had their wand out, a pulsing red glow emanating from the tip as they drew closer.
Ominis!
Anne's eyes lit up with joy as she rushed to embrace Ominis.
Oh, well, hello there, Anne.
He braced himself as they collided. He returned the embrace gently with one arm, his other arm stretched out with his wand in hand. Sebastian walked up and greeted Ominis warmly.
Ominis, you gave us quite the fright, old friend.
Mika smiled as she watched the twins interact with Ominis. She levitated towards them with her arms crossed over her chest. Ominis fell silent as he scanned the room with his wand, furrowing his brow as he picked up another figure.
You there. I can hear you.
Ominis, it's all right.
He pushed past Anne and Sebastian as he wandered over towards Mika.
Hello, cousin.
He stopped in his tracks,
Cousin?
his mouth dropping in disbelief as he lowered his wand.
Is it really you?
It is. I'm truly here. It's been a while. It's lovely to see you again.
Sebastian and Anne walked up and stood on either side of Ominis, who stood frozen in place from the sound of her voice.
This can't be. What happened? Where did you go all this time?
It's a long story, but I can show you, if you'll allow me to cure your blindness.
The twins and Ominis looked at Mika with surprise.
How? No spell could reverse my affliction before. What makes you think...
Ominis was interrupted by a tight embrace from Mika.
Just trust me, cousin. I would never cause you harm.
All right. What do you need me to do?
Mika guided Ominis over to the fountain and had him sit on the edge. Sebastian stood watching with a cocky grin on his face and arms folded. He leaned toward his sister, who stood shyly with her hands folded. Mika took one of Ominis's hands and placed it in the fountain with hers. She closed her eyes and slowly exhaled. The room fell silent. She inhaled sharply and opened her eyes. The water and her eyes were glowing that familiar turquoise once more. The water began to form a large bubble around their hands as it traveled up Ominis's arm, neck, and finally his face. The water enveloped his eyes as the glow grew brighter. Mika slowly inhaled as the water traveled back down toward the fountain before traveling up her arm. The water was absorbed into her chest. She winced before exhaling slowly and closing her eyes once more. Ominis slowly opened his eyes. At first he saw blotches of colors blurred and blended together. He blinked rapidly as the environment surrounding them came into focus. He then noticed Mika sitting in front of him.
I can see.
Tears began to well in his eyes as he dropped his wand and slid off the edge of the fountain to his knees. Mika jumped up quickly and knelt beside him.
Ominis, are you all right?
Ominis sobbed happily into his hands for a moment, while Mika and the twins looked at him with bright smiles. Ominis stood proudly, scanning the room and locking his eyes on the twins. He sobbed into the sleeve of his robe.
Now, Ominis. There's no need for tears.
I never thought I'd be able to see. How did you do it? What sort of magic was that exactly?
It's an ancient healing magic passed down in the Lefay line. It's one of the many secrets your father wants from me.
I knew my father wanted something from you. However, as I am no longer associating with my family, I never truly understood why. Where were you all this time? It's been 5 years. You realize this, don't you?
Trust me. Sebastian made me aware of the time I've missed. Mikhail locked me in the dungeons beneath the manor.
Dungeons? We don't have any dungeons that I'm aware of beneath the manor.
Oh, I assure you, they exist.
Mika unbuttoned a few buttons from her white shirt and pulled it down her left shoulder to reveal a Gaunt family emblem carved into her shoulder.
Mika wanted to track me, so he carved the Gaunt family crest into my flesh using his magic. My magic doesn't just heal otherwise difficult wounds. I can take away curses and magic, as well as gain immunity to dark magic curses.
Sebastian walked over to Mika and grabbed her arm firmly.
You can take away someone's magic?
Mika flinched away from his grasp and glared at him.
Yes, that is precisely why Mikhail wants to learn the secrets of my magic. But he doesn't know that only a Lefay has access to the magic secrets. I can certainly teach someone, but even then, there are limits.
This doesn't make sense. Why would Father go through so much trouble to gain access to such power?
Sebastian stood with a hand planted on his hip as he pondered deep in thought. Ominis walked over to Mika and gazed deeply into her eyes.
Cousin, there has to be a way to remove that infernal tracker.
Believe me, cousin. I have tried removing the tracker on my own, but I am unable as I am only half Gaunt.
Let me try.
Ominis picked up his wand off the cold floor and aimed it at Mika's left shoulder. With a quick wave of his wand, the sound of flesh squelching and pulling could be heard under Mika's shirt. Mika winced in pain and clutched her shoulder tightly, falling to her knees. Sebastian quickly knelt beside her and placed a hand on her back.
It's all right. It should pass.
Anne covered her mouth in concern as she glanced back and forth from Ominis to Mika.
End of Chapter 2, Part 1. More to come. Stay tuned, and thank you for your continued support.